Today we are going to look at percents. What is a percent? Let's look at the word. If you look at the word percent, it has the word per in it, and it has the word cent. Now you know that century is how many years? Century equals 100. So this is per 100. So percent equals parts per 100. Pause the video and write that down in your notes. Okay, we can look at percents using an area model. So here's our model, and what I have done is I have just cut out a 10 by 10 square. It's 10 this way and 10 this way from a piece of graph paper. And you can draw one yourself, or you can use a piece of graph paper to draw it. Either one will work. And what I can do, let's say I have 30%. 30%. What does that mean? That means 30 parts per 100. 30 parts per 100. Well, look, I have 100 squares here. So if I color in 30 of them, so here's the first 10. Here are the next 10. And then here are the next 10. I have 30. I have just drawn a picture of 30%. Now let's look. That could also be used to show us a fraction. Because 30 per 100 can be written this way. 30 per 100. And we could always reduce that fraction and get 3/10. Okay, if we looked at our model, look, if I divide this into tens, this model also shows me that I have shaded in 3/10. Don't forget to take some notes. You may pause the video after I say something. Pause it and write it down. All right, so we've seen the model of a percent. We've seen a fraction. Now, let's look at a decimal. A decimal, let's look at the first one we had. Now, you can tell what this decimal is too, but if I'd had an uneven number, if I'd had 35 100ths, then it wouldn't work the same way as this one. So this one, if I look at 30 100ths, remember when you learned how to say a decimal out loud? You didn't learn to say 0.30, you learned to say 30 hundredths. Or from this one, you didn't learn to say 0.3, you learned to say 3/10. So look, there's 30 hundredths. There's 3/10. Pretty cool? Now, let me look. What if we had 35 100ths? So if I wanted to change this one and I wanted to make it 35 hundredths, I'm going to color in 5 more. So there's my model. So I'm going to do this in a different color. If I have 35% equals 35 parts per 100. Now my fraction would be 35 100ths. And see, I've colored in 35 out of 100 squares. Now I could reduce that fraction as well. If I know that that 35 can be rewritten as 5 times 7, and we know that 5 goes into 100 because it ends in a 0, and you might know that that is 20, 5 times 20. If you didn't, then all you have to do is go over on the side and take the 100, divide it by 5, and you will get 20. So we can simplify this, and so this fraction is either 35 hundredths, or the simplified one is 7 over 20. Now, when I go to my decimal, I'm going to have to use my original one because this 7 over 20 doesn't necessarily get me to a decimal. I go 35 hundredths. The way I learned to say 35 hundredths or to write it as a decimal was 0.35. So this would be my decimal, this would be my fraction, this would be my percent. Pretty cool? Fractions, decimals, and percents are all different ways of writing the same number.